want to thank you all for your patience and your positive contributions. Right, so we went into the breakaway sessions, and I'll speak on behalf of my group. Thank you so much for actually engaging and thinking about these things, like very, very honest and being collegial about it, but also thinking about these things from an intrinsic point of view. Right. So we're going to come back and present. I think every group has chosen a representative to give us feedback in terms of what they discussed, in terms of, how do we implement this into the curriculum. So without further ado, I think we're going to go backwards. We're going to go purple, blue, then green. Okay. So I think in the purple group we have Dr. Nehemiah presenting. So this is my time where I actually get to walk around quite a bit, and I'll give you the mic. So please, take us away. How did the purple group do?
Okay, so thank you, colleagues. The purple group, we started with a few contestations. The discussion right off started off with the very difficulties with basic concepts and applying this. And right out of the bat, we thought that maybe multilingualism and or IKS could help with basic concepts, so that you don't include IKS maybe at this level. The conversation progressed. They was talking on the challenges of multilingualism and how do we integrate that into curriculums. Colleagues share that analogies could be a way where you use context-based examples that could teach you when you deal with this type of work. Dr. Margaret, who's gone now, spoke about how they use the concept of logic in maths and match special as an in, and she sees now, the one who raised the contestation said that maybe if she thinks about that concept of logic, she could now bring in ideas of analogies or looking at different applications. And then, of course, we came to an application. Prof. Chentu spoke about, with this loaded curriculum and content, what is the feasibility of trying to cut down all of that engagement with the content and making it project-based or project-based or problem-based teaching, where you kind of give your students the scenario of this project, and through them doing this project, they acquire all of this, but there's a lot of labor involved in that. So possibly you would need some infrastructure in the form of demis or postgraduate students. Even postdocs were raised. Budgetary constraints that comes along with that, the shift in culture that is needed. And also talking about, can we find creative ways to work with the current austerity that we find ourselves under? Because it doesn't seem like we're going to get more money anytime soon. So how do we work with what we have? Could we possibly partner with industries, with partners to come along to support this type of work that we do? There was also talks then about, okay, this is lovely, project-based is lovely, but what about AI? Because if we do project-based, then students can simply use AI, And so we were talking about how then you think critically about the ethical use of AI and how you can inspire or can facilitate that in the students that you engage in. We ultimately want to we want to create transformative learning experiences where our students can become independent thinkers, independent learners, where we can reach that metacognitive state of teaching and learning in the classroom. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Latola. Yeah, look, I'm allowed to comment in between since I have the mic. And, I think one of the beauties of what your group has mentioned is that we understand the resource constraints as well. I can tell you were sitting with someone from management, Prof. Chentu, when you're talking about budgets and constraints. And those are realities, And I think this is where, we have to think about these things and be very innovative in a way. But there's a lot of truth to that, and considering the different disciplines as well. How you mentioned the mathematics, as well as some of the project-based type learning as well. One could almost see that in certain instances, we're not going to use a blanket approach when it comes to this. We're going to have to be very, specific in terms of, our approach within the different disciplines and how we look at it. Right. So thank you so much to the purple group. And I think now we can move to the blue group. And I think in our group it was Dr. Mbava who would give us, feedback as to what we discussed. Over to you.
Thank you. In our group, the first thing that came to mind was what is a curriculum, and trying to understand what a curriculum is, trying to drive a body of knowledge that needs to be imparted to students. But in the discussion, we also touched on the content itself to say, Africanization does not necessarily mean that we need to change our curriculum. We need to keep that knowledge base, the knowledge that needs to be imparted to students. It still has to maintain that strength. But maybe it's the approach to the presentation is one of them, in terms of how do we deliver in such a way that our students are not left behind. It could be in the way in which we teach in class. We must try and really look at that in terms of the presentation. The other thing also that is related to that is in other words, that the content needs to relate to the environment in which we survive in. In other words, some of the examples that we teach or that we give in terms of where the content relates to, it must at least be derived from Africa. It must be derived from the surroundings in terms of what we have. And some of the things that came in mind was that there are some structures that we tend to have within, say, South Africa to begin with before you even cross the borders. The rendezvous we have, they relate to quite a number of disciplines, from architecture, even physics, just trying to describe how the roofs to these rendezvous, these huts are constructed. Nicely done. And we're simply saying that at times there's so much of body of knowledge which is there, and we can always relate to that. Even in mathematics, we can also relate to that from geometry point of view. So at least we need to relate the content or to relate our examples to what is surrounding us too, so that at least there is meaning to that, rather than drawing an example of something which is outside Africa where students cannot even relate to. So that was to do with the content. But apart from that, also there's also need to invest time in doing this, because you need to have that conviction. You need to find those particular examples. So time is needed to be able to do that. Then apart from that, what also was more at the center of discussion was assessment. You say the ways in which we assess, probably they need to change. Probably the type of assessments we have currently are robust. In some cases that at times some may feel that it's not just an examination which has to be the right way of assessing. You might need to try and innovate, try and probably move to, some of the modules would move to continuous assessment, whatever the case is, and improve in terms of what to do during that continuous assessment. It should not just be a move to continuous assessment for the sake of moving. Then also we took into consideration what came from the discussion here. I think the languages, that it may be very ideal to diversify, and not just to give an examination in one language. Obviously, one could probably think of how to do so. There was a mention of the, say, generative AIs to do that, but in some cases there may be some errors in doing so. So there may be need for a language expert to be able to check and ensure that when you change it to another language, then it has to be the correct thing. So you need language experts as well as discipline experts. I could relate, say, from mathematics, say there are certain terms that we have to, even from biology, even from other disciplines, that need to have the right terms to be used. It's not just the connecting words. But at the same time, also there's investment, there's money required to do so. Initially, I would say that there must be, or there can be, say, within a department, somebody who volunteers at least to drive this. But then volunteering at times has got its own experiences to say the job doesn't get done. So probably there's need to invest in this to ensure that whoever wants to take on that particular task has to be remunerated, and something that has to come out with quality, because we need to see value in investing in that. Also to do with question banks also came into light in terms of that. There are other things also that we have talked about. I mean, something that was discussed was, but not to a great extent, the writing of books. Say someone at least tried to write a book locally, but there were things that came short from that. So, but in any case, an observation that we tend to see is that we are not writing books. Much of our time we are teaching, and at times we may find that there is so much content. Somebody has taught a module for some time, we repeat, after 3 years we move on and so forth, but that content can be consolidated into textbooks that could be used, but somehow we are not writing, we have not taken that advantage. We keep on using books where, again, examples are drawn from overseas, and so to some extent, I don't know how best we can do it, but we need to be promoted to be able to write the textbooks. I think that's much of what we discussed.
Thank you, Dr. Mbava. Yeah, that's true. I think what we're picking up now is that there's an earnest need for us to invest into a lot of things, and this approach is not something that's, of course, not going to happen overnight. I mean, I think it's a step-by-step process. But the fact that we are identifying, some of these deficiencies, and also some of the things that we perhaps have to do, moving forward, I think that's a positive on our side. Right. When we speak about Africanization and everything, I thought maybe we'd break into song and all these things. And I thought of Dr. B, and I was thinking after her conversation, we'd talk about meet you at the river. But I think for the sake of the HR is not in the room, Dr. B, don't worry. But no, it's fine. It's being recorded. But Dr. B, over to you from the Green Group.
Okay, so I was tempted to, start with a song there, but I'll leave it. So we, in our group, we started with a challenge, which we all aware that our numbers have increased over the years. And how we grappling with reaching out to students in large classes, and now trying to think how then do we implement Africanization, especially also in terms of reaching out in terms of different languages, etc., in a large classroom. And then we sort of looked around if it's possible to have a interpreting or translation tool that in that large classroom can be utilized while maybe the lecturer or the facilitator is busy with a certain concept or explanation, then different interpretations go to students at the same time. Maybe like I'm speaking in English now, and then a student that cannot understand English, then they've got this tool that as I talk, it's interpreting in their own language, So we were just playing around that idea, and then there was also another input that there is an app which is used for students with a deaf disability. That, as you talk, then it translates to them in sign language. I hope I got that one right. It's called a Convo app. So we were wondering if maybe there isn't an app that can also do the same, to translate in different languages while you are communicating with students live at real time. So I think we spent a lot of time around that because we also thinking that there must be a radical thinking in all of this, what we're doing, and innovation as well. So we must not just think of things that are existing, we must also think of novelty as well. And then so this app thing, I think it's also a homework for everyone now, that we look into tools like that, whether they exist, and if they don't exist, how can we get such a tool? How can we have an AI like that will translate in different languages for students in real time while I'm teaching, for example. And then we went to now on debate on possible implementations. And I think the low-hanging fruit is the terminology interpretations or glossaries. And this is doable. And also Funda does have this ability. There's a tool on Funda if you want to start creating glossaries, etc. So this was new information, even for myself and some of the colleagues. So we will look into that. And I think the main discussion was on the lack of records in a particular way that we would assume that a record should be in a written form. That is now the indigenous knowledges or prior knowledge, that it could be that the recording doesn't necessarily mean that it must be written down. It could be that there are different translations, and that's how this information has been preserved. Not look in one dimension. And then we sort of encouraged ourselves that we do need to do a writing. We need to write about what we're doing so that we can publish, so that other scholars and communities can also be aware of what is happening in our spaces, because we believe that lived experiences, they also need to be shared, but we need to be authors of those documents. And because we find this also as a gap in scholarship. And this will also encourage students, even at higher level, that writing is important. You should not just be able to write a physics report. You also need to write for other, And then we looked at that perhaps the faculty will also look at bringing in someone from linguistics, but this must be someone who will understand the disciplines as well, even if not entirely, but just to have an understanding of what science is. But also this can be a mix of people, because you do want to get experts in the field, maybe, speaking a different language than you as a lecturer. And so we need to bring in these people in our space going forward. We need to invite them. And there was a sort of, I don't know if it was not a question per se, but how do we communicate computer science to students who have never seen or touched. Maybe they've seen it on TV or phone or something, but who have never used a computer before. How do we link the function of a keyboard? For example, we were discussing that outside after the interaction. How do you explain what a keyboard is to someone who has never used a computer before? You know, so we had a discussion around that, and I alluded that it is doable, it's possible, because examples that you want to link, it's not necessarily a computer science example, but if you want a student to understand what a keyboard function is, you can think of an example that is related to the function of the keyboard. So we should run away from direct, I think Prof. Chentu also mentioned that earlier, direct translations and interpretations, because if you explain a certain concept but using a different narrative from day to day living, and then a student, if they understand that, then they will be able to link it now to computer science. And we also have a homework there just to verify that really computer science is totally a westernized concept. Was it not done before in an African culture in a different way? So we have that homework as well. And then the last part was that we really need to continue with the conversations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. B. Look, colleagues, I think we're in the right step. I think we're going in the right direction. I appreciate the fact that we're looking at really testing ourselves in terms of innovation as well. Dr. B, I think you mentioned, and I'm glad that you also included sign language, that convo module and so forth. You know, these things start off as you know, big ideas, you know, but they actually do exist. I mean, for instance, when you look at sign language and everything, that's based on CNNs, actually. It's convolutional neural networks. That's how they pick it up, yeah? We know a little bit about some things, but, you know, these things are very important, because what it's saying to us is that we need to leverage some of the things that we already have in our possession for us to achieve some of these tasks. And, you know, I think in our group we spoke about, you know, this generative AI, for instance, the ChatGPTs. I mean, you know, there's already a large language model that exists with African languages. It's called Nkuba, LM. You can download the algorithm, or rather the API, and you can actually plug it in. So these are the things that I think were very important and that we need to start thinking about moving forward. And I really appreciate the fact that we are also starting to look as a faculty that we have to report back in terms of the things that we're doing. I mean, that scholarship of teaching and learning, that SOTL, is very important, because then it also advises on our practices as well in terms of us moving forward. So I think with that in mind, I want to thank every single one of you for contributing to the breakaway sessions. And my job is almost done, but without further ado, I'd like to bring the acting dean of the faculty, Prof. Chentu, to give us those closing remarks and take it away from us. Thank you, Prof.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Saba. I indicated your agility in aspects that you do already. Of course, that already reflects maybe people didn't understand what I was talking about. So this faculty could run with any dean, basically. Whoever comes in and slots in, Luwabalo will be ready to brief, and and then the faculty survives. So thank you for that. And of course, I would be tempted to review what happened here today, but that would take me a while. And standing between people and fetching their own children. Maybe I must sum this up rather than put individual thoughts on this matter. And say, if we don't do this, Luwabaron, we've got young people between ages, say, 20 and 35, more than 20 million in this country, who lose, who this country would lose if we don't do these kinds of things. So it's pretty important for the workforce. We're saying we're a knowledge-based economy, right? That's what we're saying. We're saying South Africa should be a knowledge-based economy. But we're saying accessing this knowledge is not an easy thing. And therefore, what do we need to do? I think we've put some strategies in place here. Rather than have bodies in our classrooms who we are not able to engage with meaningfully. So the learning process gets lost completely. 3-4 years of a learning process. Dr. Gous. And we're saying then we're preparing this workforce for this knowledge-based economy. Are we really doing that? I think that's what we need to question. So really, this is something we need to do. We have no option. Otherwise, we lose a whole workforce of 20 million to 30 million people who could contribute meaningfully. Maybe this economy wouldn't have stagnated by now if we had done the right thing. I think so many years ago. So we have to move with speed. Of course, the students are very clear that this has moved at a very slow pace. And therefore, we then have to move with speed to address the question. It is a very difficult question for many departments. I mean, the DVCs, some of them point to the issues of leadership that has to come on board. So my HODs have to come on board to address the matter, because the DVC is clear it has to start at a leadership level if we ought to get it right. So we're not alone, I think, as Dean, Deputy Dean, and Ops Manager to deal with this question in the faculty if we are to have a transformative process. And of course it is key because the reason we then have bodies that are just sitting there and not engaging in our classroom has been characterized with clarity, even from DVC learning and teaching at the start, in terms of how we engage at a pedagogical level, how we access things using language. So it's very clear that we have a problem. That's why we don't get those engagements in class, etc., etc. So we have to move with speed, colleagues, to address these things. So I don't want to go through, but I want to thank my DVCs, of course, for raising these issues and issues of African realities that Prof. Geert talks about, and that we must critique our own disciplines and not just package and repackage information. We need to critique it for the students. So I appreciate our DVCs for that discussion. And of course, our invited speaker also talks to this language of re-intellectualizing the African languages. And Dr. Kwabe talks to the same thing in terms of that as epistemic access and epistemic justice. So we have to deal with that question of doing a partial deconstruction of certain things and then reconstructing them in a slightly different way. We cannot run away from that question. When people talk about textbooks here, they're saying exactly what you were saying to us, that we need to get there to address some of these problems. Of course, the question of scaffolding to access the knowledge is key when we talk of this now. This issue of translanguaging. It's very clear there's a lot we need to understand there on that aspect. Of course, barriers have been put forward by the students on this multilingualism question, etc., etc. And of course, Dr. Davids himself raises the issues of multiplicity of realities, which is the same thing raised by Prof. Geert, that we need to acknowledge that. We cannot move away from that. And our IKS colleagues, of course, have mapped a very clear way for us, not just at a technical level, but at a level of social inclusion. How do we deal with issues of knowledge, identities, etc., etc., to reaffirm certain producers of those knowledges? So I think work is already going in that direction, and not going into, of course, the question of IKS and nakedness raised by Dr. Neami. But just on reaffirming those communities in good ways. So with that, colleagues, obviously we have a lot of work to do. It's very clear this requires a lot of resourcing, but we can move step by step. There are some low-hanging fruits to deal with this question while the resource constraints are there. But I think if the will is there and the leadership is driving the project, we shall get there. So eventually I want to thank the facilitators, colleagues, Mr. Saba, Jenny, Dr. Slangoti, and Renewal for facilitating for today. They definitely did a good job to lead us in the right direction. Maybe let's give them a big hand, colleagues. Of course, ETP, the Engagement and Transformation Portfolio, and CriSHET, of course, for partnering with us on this journey. So Jenny, thanks to you, and of course, thank Prof. Kiet for us as well, for that. And I know, Debbie, probably with yourself, you start to repackage what was discussed here. And we get a formal report, of course, which we can use as a base to start the implementation process. I also want to thank staff, of course, in our faculty who are involved in the organization, like Dolly and others within the faculty, and HODs, of course, and academics who attended. We really appreciate that you were here to discuss these difficult topics. I cannot forget all LT CoLab, Anne and Dr. Tony, of course, by extension, Dr. Kotanyati, for assisting us with this event. So last but not least, colleagues, we can just reflect on these things. I mean, this issue is an issue of education as liberation. Paulo tells us about this, that's what we need to do to the young people, to liberate them, to be ready for what is to engage with this physical and this social world. Thank you. Go.